Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome, one and all, to Books That Make You. I am your host, Desiree Duffy, and we are talking about books that make you understand the 5 generations in today's workplace. Nowadays, and especially as many of us adjust to new work patterns like working from home, using remote tools, and trying to navigate evolving workspaces, well, we can sometimes clash with other generations. After all, why does that boomer in accounting insist on using that noisy adding machine? He can use a spreadsheet, right? Quieter, quicker. How about that annoying new Gen Z intern and all her Zoom meetings and fancy backgrounds? How is it that we can actually adapt to change in the workplace, especially if it is causing us fear and anxiety? Our guest today is Joanna Dodd Massey, Ph.D. Her book is Culture Shock: Surviving 5 Generations in One Workplace. Dr. Massey is a C-level communications executive with a Ph.D. in psychology and an MBA, and she is a generational expert who has spent more than 25 years promoting and working with 18 to 34-year-olds. In her book, Culture Shock, Dr. Massey deploys her humorous and candid writing style as she breaks the news to her cantankerous Gen X, baby boomer, and silent generation colleagues that resistance is futile and they need to change now or risk becoming irrelevant in the not-so-distant future. Her book does a deep dive into the 5 generations in the workplace, examining how they behave and why. Hint, it has to do with the era in which they were raised. She explains why human beings resist change. Why are we hardwired for it? And she provides solutions for individuals and companies to help them embrace the shifts that are happening. As she warns, this virtual army of young adults is not going to adapt to us. We need to adapt to them. Hello, Joanna. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Desiree. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let's start by describing. I hear this question a lot. What are the different generations? We hear Gen X, we hear of boomers, the silent generation. Apparently now Generation Z is coming up. Can you define them for us?
Sure. If you Google it, there are so many different numbers, birth dates rather, that go with these generations. I like to use Pew Research numbers because Pew is a very reputable social sciences research firm. So I use their numbers. So the 5 generations that we currently have in the workforce start with Gen Z, which was born between 1997 and 2012, according to Pew. So that puts them between 8 and 23 right now. Then you've got Millennials, who were born from 1981 to 1996. You've got Gen X, who Pew says is born 1965 to 1980. You have the Boomers, who were born 1945 or 46 rather to 1964. And then prior to that is the silent generation. So that's 1928 to 1945. Okay. So those are them. And the silent generation right now is in their early 70s to early 90s for the most, somewhere in that early 90s. And we have all of them in the workforce. If you really just needed to look at who was running for president actually at one point in the United States to see that Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Donald Trump are all in their 70s. In fact, Elizabeth Warren's the youngest of them, and she's 70. The rest of them are in their mid to late 70s.
That is so fascinating because a lot of times we think retirement age is 65, maybe 68, and they're staying in the workforce longer, and that's something that we can uncover too. And when it comes to leadership, we tend to look toward older people as the leaders, and yet at the same time, especially when we're talking about the workplace, we have all of these generations that need to be represented. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you think that some of the silent generation and some of the boomers too are remaining in the workplace longer than what is traditional?
Well, actually, it's a very logical answer, in my opinion, which is that we are, as human beings, we are living longer and we are living healthier than we ever have. And so people aren't ready to retire. They don't want to. There is also a financial, practical point to this, which is that it is harder to save depending on what you did for a living. Certainly, the boomers have done very well financially. In fact, they did better than the silent generation financially overall on average. But Gen X has not done as well financially as the boomers. They've dealt with now, they're currently, if you take the current financial situation, economic situation into account, they have dealt with 4 recessions during their careers. Millennials are in a lot of trouble financially and cannot retire at the age of 65. And that was prior to what we're experiencing today with the COVID-19 and economic downturn. And Gen Z is yet to be determined. But the reason that most people stay is because they still feel very active and very energetic, and they're still excited about their careers and what they're doing. And so it's really causing a problem for the younger generations because it's harder for them to move up. You can't get higher positions of authority that pay more because those jobs are still occupied by the boomers. And just to give you a quick stat, 29% of baby boomers who are 65 years and older were still in the workforce in 2018.
That's fascinating. And, I got to admit, I'm Gen X. And I felt like this Gen X squeeze. And tell me if this is a thing or if it's something I'm imagining, because I felt like while I was in the corporate world, I have my own business now and I have for several years. And the reason I did that is because I got frustrated in the corporate world because I was in a position where I was ready to move up. I was in my early 40s just waiting for it because I had been told all my life, you have to wait, you have to be patient, you have to work hard. And I did that. And then the boomer in that position, well, he hung out longer than what usually they do before they retire. And then the owner of the company, once he did retire, decided that, hey, I need to get new blood in here. I'm going to hire a millennial for that position. And I felt this huge squeeze. And I got to imagine that might be part of the situation, too, where Gen X and maybe millennials to a large degree, too, just they feel that they have no room to move either way.
That's absolutely true that both generations are getting squeezed. I think that it's hampering millennials a little more than Gen Xers, but it's certainly a problem. And you bring up you said something that was so fascinating, and I love that you said it. You're getting squeezed as a Gen Xer. Gen X is known as America's middle child. I'm a Gen Xer too, and that is our nickname right now. And the reason that is our nickname is because we are sandwiched between 2 gigantic generations, the boomers in front of us and millennials behind us. And millennials are the largest generation in the workforce today. There's way more of them in the workforce than there are Gen Xers and boomers. And so, it is causing I call it a logjam. There's only so many C-level positions at the top. The corporation is a pyramid, and as you get higher up there, it gets harder. So yeah, it is causing problems for both generations.
Let's talk about the different eras. An 18-year-old was raised at a much different time than an 80-year-old. And tell us how exactly that does affect us at work then. I mean, how is it different for the 80-year-old as compared to that 18-year-old?
One of the examples that I give in my book, Culture Shock, is that I like to use the example of, let's say you're in a discussion about procuring papers and boxes for an office. It's a very dull conversation, but it's a really worthy example. Mm-hmm. And let's just pretend you've got a silent generation person in there, so someone who's in their early 70s. You've got a Gen Xer, so someone who's between the ages of 40 and 55 right now. And you've got a Gen Zer who's really young, just entered the workforce 2 years ago. The silent generation person is going to come at that from their experience. They grew up during the Depression or immediately following the Depression. When they opened their gifts at holiday time, they had to do it carefully. They had to save the wrapping paper. They had to save the boxes. In a lot of cases, mom was ironing the wrapping paper because it needed to be reused for the next holiday. The Gen Xer grew up during the excess of the 1980s. We tore open our gifts. We threw the boxes and the paper in a huge, giant plastic garbage bag and didn't think twice about it. And the Gen Zer has existential angst about the use of any paper and any boxes because of the harm that it does the environment. And now take that conversation with those three people in it and imagine with their experience, where they're coming from, how they might attack that problem. And you can see where those differences are and how that could cause conflict, which it is.
And let's dig into that conflict a little bit more. One of the things that I really like about your book is it digs into fear. That's the core issue, right? And it causes stress, frustration, anger, defensiveness. Can we talk about that core of fear? Because what you just described there is different levels of fear, I guess, except for Gen X, who's just like, hey, it doesn't matter. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's based in fear, isn't it?
It's based in two things. I believe, as someone who studies psychology with a doctorate in psychology, I believe that there are two sponsoring emotions. One is fear, and the other is pleasure, right? And fear is the emotion that underlies anger, sadness, anxiety, panic, that type of thing. And it's frequently fear masquerades as other things. Fear can masquerade as bravado and narcissism. So, but it's under it. If you really dig deeply, you're going to find fear. And it's something that I do often when I'm coaching executives and CEOs and other clients, because and it's a little surprising to some of these people that it's coming from a place of fear. But you're right. Fear is one of the big problems. And then the second issue is change. Human beings are hardwired to resist change. And that comes from a system known as the amygdala, or the reptilian brain is sort of a pop psychology way of referring to it. The amygdala has a really interesting job in our lives, and I love it. At first I thought this thing is useless. Why do we have it? But it's really for survival. So it has a huge purpose. But basically the amygdala, its job is to calm down the system, and it takes its job really seriously, as it should, because it was formed when our biggest stressors were, hey, there's a tiger behind that tree, I got to run. So it has an excellent purpose. The problem is that it doesn't realize, as we've changed, it doesn't know there's no tiger behind the tree. It can treat being late to work, or, not having something not go the way you want it to go in the office. It can treat that like a major stressor. And when the body becomes too stressed, the amygdala is like a general, right? You can't have too many generals in a battle. So the amygdala becomes the 5-star general. The amygdala is in charge. Everybody else shuts down. That includes executive functioning. Executive functioning is exactly what it sounds like. Executive functioning is like, it makes rational decisions. It exerts self-control. It is the rational part of our brain. That part of our brain gets shut down when we hit a certain stress level, and the amygdala takes over. And the amygdala searches for the thing that calms down the system. And the way it does that is by checking into every experience we have ever had. It is a massive computer program, if you can imagine it like that. And every experience we've ever had goes back to childhood. It goes back to infancy. It goes back to in utero. So this is how complex our brain system is. And so what happens is when people are stressed, you've got two reactions. You've got this stress mechanism that comes up, and the second, and what it does is it in order to calm down the system, it goes back in history to look for things that calms it down, which is part of why we are literally wired to not change, because it's searching for stuff that we like, that makes us feel comfortable, that's familiar to us.
And absolutely, in the workplace, when something happens, as you were describing that, I just recall personalities within the workplace where they might react to a situation by being more forceful. more demanding,
Yes.
the boss that's now telling you must stay late and get that spreadsheet done, etc. And then I also recall some people who just, they regress. It's like they go into their own little eggshell. It's like, don't talk to me, leave me alone. I don't want to be involved. So I can definitely see that playing out in the workplace.
So you just touched on something interesting that I didn't mention exactly, but the amygdala controls the fight, flight, or freeze process, right? So a lot of people have probably heard of that because it's a very popular term. And fight, flight, or freeze is basically your natural instinct to either fight against something, to just freeze and not say anything, or to flee a situation. And a highly stressful situation in the office can trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response. And I have a second book that came out recently called Communicating During a Crisis. And it's about influencing others when you're in a crisis. And it was born out of the pandemic. And it's what I call a brief book because it is shorter than a normal book. It's about half the size of a normal book and a very quick and easy read. But I talk a lot about that, about how it's really important to recognize that when people are stressed, like the situation we're in today, or frankly, in any high stress situation at any time in an office, that you're not necessarily dealing with someone whose brain is thinking rationally, right? It's digging in. It doesn't want to change. The amygdala is also where our unconscious bias comes from. And so, it's a really interesting system. And it was, like I said, it was created for survival. But it can, in today's world, cause problems. So it helps if we're aware of it, if we understand its functioning, if we know that it's happening, because we can then calm ourselves down and get back into that rational executive head.
That is so fascinating. Okay, I want to dig into what we're experiencing today because the workplace has changed so much because of social distancing and telecommuting, etc. But first, can we talk quick about the ways that we can actually then embrace change? Because there are some solutions, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are so many different ways you can do it. And certainly, there are tons of self-help solutions out there. But one of the things that I personally love to do, and that's been very effective for me, there are two things that I look at. The first is I call them mantras. You could call them jingles, like you could call them whatever you want. But I have a series of mantras that I like to say to myself. And it's really important that it's a saying. And what I do is that let's say one of my favorite ones that I've been using recently, and I use this example in Culture Shock, is I'm enjoying the roller coaster ride of life. And the reason that mantra works for me is because when I get stressed, I sit there with the mantra and I'm like, okay, I'm enjoying the roller coaster ride of life. I put a hand either on my chest or maybe I put it on my stomach. I take a deep breath and I just repeat it to myself a few times and I calm down. Like I say it to myself in a calm way and it reminds me that life comes with ups and downs. It's part of this deal and I might not like what's happening, but I can recognize that this is what life is and it's going to be okay. And the point of the mantra is what happens is now, because I've been doing it for so long and I set the reminders app on my phone to ping me with that mantra a couple times a day rather, because it's in my head now, when I get stressed and the amygdala goes searching for something to calm me down, it's pulling up the mantra, right? It's literally pulling up that deep breath and that reflex to put my hand on my chest, and then the mantra runs in my brain, and I have that memory, like, okay, things aren't great in this moment, but this is going to pass, and this is part of life, and it calms down my system, right? So I've retrained my brain, and that's what I talk about in the book is retraining your brain.
That's great advice. That really seems practical, and the fact that you're helping your brain to do something that it naturally just wants to do. It's already searching for that. Exactly.
And there are a million tricks, by the way. That's just one small one. And mantras are as unique as there are individuals in the world. But I also talk about, other things that you can do as a person to embrace change, to understand. I especially talk about, understanding where other people are coming from. I think that's really vital, is that we understand other people. frequently we are quick to judge others or to assume the worst. God, that guy is so lazy. Why'd he do that again? He's always late with his work, that kind of thing. As opposed to saying to the person, and then as a boss, you might say to, you were late with that project again. Well, you're instantly making that person defensive, right? No matter what generation they come from. But if you're able to say to somebody, hey, I noticed you were late on that assignment. I really liked what you turned in, but what happened with the deadline? And then the person says to you something like, I'm sorry, my kid was sick yesterday and I was on the phone with doctors all day long. I really, I had trouble getting it in on time. Well, then now you're in a different position where you can be more understanding as opposed to argumentative. And you can say something like, I know what you're saying. I had that happen to me like a month ago. It's really hard to deal with. I get it. And at that point, you can say like, hey, in the future, if that happens, could you just tell me? Like, come in and let me know, and let's work on it. We could have gotten somebody else to help you, or we could have changed the deadline, or So yeah. You're entering a conversation as opposed to a combative situation, which then the combative situation creates the stress, and it's when things escalate and they get a little more out of control.
And I've noticed, too, that you talk about in your book how Dale Carnegie's method from, oh, my God, so long ago, it's a classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's part of it, too, isn't it?
Yes. So I actually really like Dale Carnegie's method. And the reason I mention it in that book, and I don't mention it in Communicating During Crisis, but I do go into it in Culture Shock, that is a 100-year-old book. Now, the reason it's still relevant, and hear me out on this, the reason it's still relevant is because he's talking about human reactions, and times change, circumstances change, like the outside world changes, but what doesn't change is human defense mechanisms, fear, the amygdala. So what his How to Win Friends and Influence People, what that book did was really touch on some basic concepts about influencing people. And as I've looked at other books about influencing people, I noticed there's a general theme, frankly, including my own, that Communicating During a Crisis. I have the same, influencing people idea, where we're really boiling it down to three things, in my opinion. Understanding. It's really important to understand other people. It's really important to compliment them and relate to them so that they're put at ease, because then they're set up to be influenced. And then the third thing is to make suggestions in a positive way, not in a negative, punitive, blaming, shaming way, because that's when defense comes up. That's really when I look at all of these books, including my own, as I said, like, this is what we're suggesting.
And nowadays, too, so I know how hard it can be communicating in an office environment when you're relying on email messaging and texts and Skype messaging and whatever. I got to imagine that the challenges in communicating that way are even more so now with remote working and social distancing and using technology, right?
Yes and no. It's very interesting what's happening, and it's not surprising when you think about it, although whenever I say this, people go, oh, and I'll tell you what it is. When this whole situation happened in March, everybody, and we all went to work from home, and suddenly Zoom became everybody's best friend, and we're all experts on it all, when nobody knew what it was, 48 hours before that. And what happened was that, yes, the younger generations, your young millennials, your Gen Zers, they adapted really quickly to the technology of working from home, whereas your older generations, especially the silent generation and some of the boomers, the older boomers, they had a little bit more rough time navigating the technology at first. But once they all got used to it, the people who were better navigating the crisis and the change are the older generations, not the younger ones. And the reason is because older people have been on this planet longer and they've lived more life. They have more experience with this type of dramatic shift, and they know that no matter how unpleasant things are right now, they will change, that things will get better, that things will go back to normal. And even if they don't go back to normal, we're at least going to adjust to whatever that new normal is. Younger people don't have that perspective. They don't have the life experience to realize that. And what we're seeing in younger workers right now is a lot of stress and anxiety and difficulty coping, because what's happening feels like the end of the world. It feels like they're never going to recover financially. They're never going to be able to dig out from under. We're never going to be the same. They're never going to fly again and travel and have fun the way they used to. You know, they just don't have the life experience that older generations have to know it's going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the patience, too, to understand, okay, can ride this out like we've ridden out so many other things. I mean, even thinking back to 9/11, you know, that was, it doesn't seem so long ago to me, but we got through that. So I think you're absolutely right that we, you know, older people have that perspective and younger people are just in a panic because they've never experienced anything like this before. And so what advice do you have for younger people that might be feeling stress or anxiety or you know, they're worried about the outcome and their future?
I do a lot of corporate talks. Now I do them on Zoom, which has been really fun because I don't have to fly all over the place to go to these corporations and talk to these organizations, which has been, I mean, don't get me wrong, because I love traveling, but this has been quite nice. So anyway, and what I tell employees, younger employees, and what I also tell management and executives, management teams, is you really need to, for the larger corporations, for the ones that are inclined to provide some outside help, you know, therapists and access to that type of thing, that's going to be very beneficial. But really what we need now is just an understanding of what's going on. And it's why prior to this, and especially during this situation with COVID-19, I go into these companies and I just talk to them. It's like educating them about what's happening and the things that you and I are talking about right now. It really just helps. It helps everyone take a collective sigh of relief, of a big breath, and sort of recognize, like, okay, what I'm experiencing is normal. It's to be expected. It is, and we just need to have some understanding. I really encourage management to, you know, recognize that this is not a normal situation and that younger employees might be experiencing it different than they are, right? Because sometimes it's hard. Like, we see the world one way and we think everybody sees it the same way, and they don't, right? So I remind them, you know, you see the world differently, and your younger employees are having a very different experience right now, and we need to work with that. And there needs to be a little more opening and a little more, you know, can you be more flexible with deadlines? If somebody seems to be missing a lot of deadlines, you know, check in on them. It's not that the corporation needs to, you know, should be getting involved in people's personal business, but at the same time, quite frankly, we are seeing an increase in drinking habits. We're seeing an increase in eating, compulsive eating. We're seeing an increase in a lot of, unfortunately, domestic violence. You know, this is for people who have trouble self-regulating or who have trouble calming themselves down. This is really going to kick in some of those negative, harmful habits and behaviors, and corporations are in a unique position right now to really see that happening in a way that they don't normally, just because, you know, they'll see the fluctuation in, they'll more clearly see the fluctuation in performance.
Sure, absolutely. And who do you feel is best served by your book? It seems like it's all of these generations, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's for everybody. And I wrote it, my writing style is very conversational. I'm not a flowery writer. As a communications person, I believe in being concise and clear. And so it's a very easy read. And in fact, some of my mom's friends who are silent generation, so they're late 70s, early 80s, they were very sweet and supportive and bought the book. None of them, they're not in the workplace right now. And some of them haven't been in the workplace for quite some time. And the biggest compliments I'm getting are from people who have nothing really related to this book, and yet who buy it and read it because they're friends of mine or friends of my mom's, and who call me or email me and say things like, that was a really enjoyable read, and I really got a lot out of that, and that really helped me better understand my grandchild or my own child or, you know, this family member. And I hear that from both sides. It's not just from older to younger, but it's also for the younger people. It really helps them understand their baby boomer or their silent generation bosses. It really, the tools with, you know, how to help each other, how to be help yourself, deal with change as an individual and help companies deal with change. Those tools are for everybody, and it helps people manage up, right? Junior people manage up as well as more senior people manage the people that report into them.
That's fabulous. And where can people find the book, both of your books actually, and your website, and get more information?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So both of the books are on Amazon and on barnesandnoble.com. Once Barnes and Noble reopens, Culture Shock will be in the stores, but unfortunately not right now. So both of them can be gotten online, either in paper book or in ebook format. And my website, my company is called J.D. Massey Associates. And so my website is jdmainc.com. And we're doing a lot of really fun things, and I'm actually really proud of the website. I have a blog, and when you subscribe to it, I post very quick blogs. They're 2-minute reads. Like I said, I like clear and concise. So I only post, it's a 2-minute read once a week, an update on, views of what's going on, current events, to look at it through a generational lens, how to look at it through a crisis communications and influencing lens. We do, right now I'm doing trainings for people on Zoom, how to give a presentation and do Q&A and on Zoom, like what your background should look like and how a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So like what's behind you and the way you look is as important as the message and what you're saying. And then the other thing that we're doing now is we're also publishing brief books for executives. They're very short books. They're half the size of normal, and we help executives. They're really about being a thought leader and it's a calling card for, you as you want to start to, extend your personal brand in your business.
I love that. I love that. There's so much great advice on your website, and both books are fantastic. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so helpful, so enlightening. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
You bet. And once again, everybody, my name is Desiree Duffy, and thank you for being with us today on Books That Make You. And you can find out more about us on the website, booksthatmakeyou.com. You can also follow us. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Sign up for the newsletter. Find out about all sorts of bookish fun things that are going on. Win some books. Read up on your favorite authors and more. Until next time, please, my bibliophile friends, enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.